Chapter 4. Beneath the Surface. The car rattled to a stop in front of a small boxy building with peeling paint, the faded emblem of the Lazarus Institute barely visible on the door. Will stared at the structure in silence. The so-called efficiency unit was hardly more than a repurposed storage container. One barred window, a battered door that looked like it had been kicked in more than once. "This is it?" Will asked, disbelief thick in his voice. Keith leaned back in the driver's seat and nodded. "Yeah, they started pushing people out of the old neighborhoods about 5 years ago, called these temporary housing solutions." Will scoffed, shaking his head. "Temporary, huh?" Keith's expression softened. "Look, I know it's not much, but it's a start. You're out now, bro." He playfully slapped Will's chest. "You'll figure it out." Will exhaled, his shoulders slumping. I wish I could have been there. For her." Keith's gaze didn't waver. "She knew you loved her, man. She always talked about how proud she was of you, even after everything." Will leaned forward, gripping the door handle tightly. "I know she did." Keith reached over, resting a firm hand on Will's shoulder. "She always believed in you. She wanted better for you. And I know you're gonna make it happen. You got this." Will stared down at his hands for a moment before nodding. "Thanks, bro, for everything. For being there for her when I couldn't. I owe you." Keith smiled faintly. "You don't owe me shit. That's what family does." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The faint hum of the car engine filled the silence. Finally, Will opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. "You heading home after this?" Keith hesitated. "Nah, got a shift at Lazarus tonight. Shouldn't be too bad. I'll hit you up tomorrow, all right?" "Yeah, all right. Be safe." Something about Keith's tone made Will's chest tighten. As Keith drove off, Will stood there for a moment, staring at the small unit that was now his home. He clenched his fists, swallowing the rising bitterness in his throat. Time moved slowly after that. Days blurred together as he tried to settle into a routine, though the cramped, soulless efficiency unit never felt like home. He spent hours staring at the peeling walls, haunted by thoughts of everything he'd lost and the little he had left. Keith's discovery, 3 nights earlier. Keith's boots echoed softly against the polished floors as he made his rounds through the lower levels of the Lazarus Institute. Most nights the job was uneventful, just endless loops of checking doors, logging minor maintenance issues, and pretending not to notice the uneasy silence that clung to the place like a fog. But tonight felt different. The air was heavier, pressing against his skin like an unseen force. The faint hum of machinery pulsed through the walls, a rhythmic vibration beneath his feet, a heartbeat. Then he heard it, a scream, muffled, distant, but undeniable. Keith froze, his body tensing. His hand instinctively hovered near the baton at his hip, but he didn't unclip it. Not yet. He scanned the empty hallway, trying to pinpoint the source. Then, another scream, shorter, cut off abruptly, like someone had clamped a hand over their mouth. His grip on the baton tightened. The supervisors told the security guards hardly anything. Just patrol their sections and stay out of restricted areas. The doctors, even worse, they moved in tight groups, their conversations hushed, their expressions unreadable. Keith had tried greeting one of them once, just a casual, "Evening, Doc." The man had barely acknowledged his existence. To them, security wasn't made up of people. They were just another piece of equipment. Now, standing alone in the dimly lit corridor, the echoes of those cut-off screams still ringing in his ears, Keith knew one thing for certain. Something was very, very wrong, and he had to find out what. The restricted area. Keith moved carefully, staying close to the wall as he rounded the next corner. He had no clearance for the lower sectors. The last time a security guard asked too many questions, they got relocated to another facility. No one ever heard from them again. That should have been enough to stop him, but curiosity and something deeper, something more primal, pushed him forward. That's when he saw them, a group of guards, 6 of them, heavily armed, moving large unmarked crates toward a reinforced door. Not normal guards, these were different. They wore tactical armor, their faces obscured by dark helmets. The Lazarus insignia was printed across their chests, but Keith had never seen them before. He stayed in the shadows, watching. Their movements were too sharp, too precise. This wasn't routine supply transport. This was something else. Then something on the floor caught his eye, a glint of plastic. He bent down, picking it up, and his pulse spiked. Dr. Eliza Morton. Keith knew the name, a high-level researcher, one of Lazarus's best. And now her ID badge was lying here, just outside a restricted sector. His gut twisted. The guards had already disappeared through the secured door. Now or never. Sliding the badge through the access panel, he braced himself. A soft beep, a hiss of depressurization, the lock released. Keith hesitated, heart pounding in his ears. He wasn't supposed to be here, but that scream. Someone needed help. Fuck it, he murmured to himself as he stepped. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by flickering overhead fluorescence. Observation windows lined the walls, casting warped reflections of Keith as he crept forward. A metallic tang clung to the air. Then he saw it, a massive lab sprawling beyond a thick glass partition. Rows of people strapped to metal tables, tubes snaking from their veins into humming machines, screens flashing data he couldn't begin to understand. Some of them convulsed violently, their bodies twisting, writhing, mutating in ways that defied reason. Others lay disturbingly still, too still, their forms unnatural, frozen mid-transformation. Keith's breath hitched. Feathers sprouted from arms, scales glinted under the harsh lights, claws jutted where fingers should have been. This wasn't medicine. This was something else. A sickening realization settled in his gut. Lazarus wasn't saving lives. They were creating something unnatural. A whisper of sound, a shadow shifting at the edge of the room. Keith barely had time to react before a blur of motion, a sharp sting in his neck. His vision wavered. The room spun. He stumbled, knees buckling, arms suddenly too heavy to lift. Through the haze, he caught one last glimpse. A pair of glowing eyes, a twisted, sadistic smile. Then, darkness. Will's search. Back in the present, Will paced the tiny efficiency unit, his thoughts racing. He had tried calling Keith again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The knot in Will's stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Keith never ignored his calls, especially not for this long. He grabbed his hoodie and headed out into the night, determined to find answers. Will scoured the city, asking anyone who might know something, people on the street, old friends, anyone who would talk, but no one had seen Keith. Finally, at a small store tucked into a quiet corner of the neighborhood, the clerk behind the counter gave a shrug. Will leaned against the counter, his brow furrowed as he had asked, "You seen Keith around?" The clerk paused, tapping the register with a pen. "Last I heard, he was working security over at Lazarus." He lowered his voice, glancing around as if someone might overhear. "There's some weird shit going on over there. You might want to think twice about poking around." Will straightened. "What you mean?" The clerk sighed, leaning in closer. "You remember Jay? Used to come in here all the time for smokes and lotto tickets. He started working over at Lazarus about 2 months back. Said the pay was good, but something about the place had him on edge. Then one day he just stopped showing up." Will frowned. "You're saying he's missing?" The clerk nodded grimly. "I haven't seen him, and no one else around here has either. Folks talk, but no one's got answers. Just be careful, all right?" The thought sat heavy in Will's chest as he made his way toward the Lazarus Institute. The building loomed in the distance, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on the empty streets. "If he's in there, I'm getting him out," Will muttered. His jaw set. He slipped through the outer fence, sticking to the shadows as he made his way toward the side entrance. Memories of his first failed heist flickered in his mind as he smirked bitterly to himself. Let's hope this time goes better. The lock clicked under his pick, a faint metallic sound that echoed in the stillness of the night. Will glanced over his shoulder, his senses heightened, scanning the deserted alley behind him. His breath was steady, but his heart pounded in his chest as he slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open and Will slipped inside, pausing just past the threshold. The cold, sterile air of the building washed over him, carrying with it a faint chemical tang that stung his nose. It was sharp and oppressive, a stark contrast to the muggy air outside. For a moment he stood still, letting his eyes adjust to the dim, clinical lighting as unease settled deep in his gut.